Hey everyone, and welcome back to Channel Gazmash. Bit different to my normal reaction content on my interviews with bands and artists. I wanted to spend some time talking about what a song was actually written about and the true story that sits behind the song. We all listen to music and we all take away things from songs to help us get through moments in life, or the messages that we feel that song is giving us to really help us through whatever moment it is we're going through. And these are not always sad times, it can be really happy moments. You know, music is ever growing and just massively part of everyone's life, especially mine, and I'm sure yours. So the song I'm going to talk about today is Jeremy by the band Pearl Jam. Now, I'll be letting you know about what that was written about and the story that was sitting behind that. So Pearl Jam Jeremy was one of their biggest hits, if not their biggest hit. This was quite controversial in the storyline, a very controversial music video which depicted school violence. Now, Eddie Vedder's purpose in that song, from what I read, was to speak out against bullying, fundamentally. And this differs slightly from what the actual song was based upon. And Eddie Vedder himself has also said, from what I've read, that he didn't reach out to the families, he didn't want to intrude, and that element of the story in the song isn't what was happening in the true fact of what the song was based on. So in the spring of 1991, Eddie Vedder opened up the newspaper and read about this horrific and shocking teenage suicide which had occurred in a school, which, you know, would be horrific to read for anybody. The story told you about the boy Jeremy Dell. He was 15-year-old. And it just basically spoke about how he'd killed himself, which we will come to at the end. Jeremy Wade Dell, born in 10th Feb 1975 in Maria, Callaway, Kentucky, USA. His parents, who were Joseph and Wanda Dell, divorced later in the coming years in 1978. But from what I've read, this, although it would have affected him like it affects many of us who've experienced, parents divorcing, it was other events leading through his life which, although this would have played a part in it, other things had occurred which, led to feelings of depression and loneliness. To this day, his mother's still not entirely sure what had caused him to feel the way he did and why he felt suicide was the way out for him. She tells about his artistic talents, how he'd won at Texas State Fair in 1982-83 with the elephant drawing, which I'll put up on the screen. The skill in this drawing just shows how talented he was artistically. He was also known as a really good drummer, so he was very artistic in the things that he put his hands to. Wanda now runs a grief support group in her church to support people going through this sort of horrendous grief. So in 1989, Jeremy starts grade 9 in Bryan Adams High School. There were lots of people who commented that he was very friendly, people spoke very fondly of him, and he was well liked in the school. So at this point in his life, we know that everything was still okay. He's attending school and he was happy. And in 1990, at a winter chill retreat sponsored by Case of View Baptist Church in the Dallas suburb, Jeremy meets Nancy and begins dating what would become his first love. Nancy wasn't involved in the same things that he was to be later involved with, truancy from school, the drug abuse, which essentially had come from this unknown depression which was building up inside of him. In late March 1990, Jeremy withdraws from the grade 9 at Bryan Adams High School in Dallas, and he attends Richard Junior High School, which is an independent school. While living with his father, I couldn't find the reason for the sudden move as to why he went from that one school to another, but that may have caused, the anger within him, obviously being moved away from friends and family, and effectively Nancy as well. And in April 1990, Nancy breaks up with Jeremy, and days later, Jeremy is reported of making his first attempt at suicide by taking an excessive amount of tablets. He was admitted to Timberlawn Psychiatric Hospital following this to try and obviously help this young man deal with these issues that he's having. But this wasn't to be his only the only suicide attempt before the fatal day. He attempts suicide 2 more times. The second, where he tries to get in touch with Nancy by going to the Baptist church, where he climbed up a cliff and threatened to jump off the cliff. He didn't jump, but necessarily was his second, attempt at suicide. And the third one, he drives to Nancy's house and threatens to shoot himself because of family and school problems. Now, obviously, that highlights to us that he was struggling mentally. The first attempt, let alone the second, and then the third, gave a reason. Now, the catalyst for this, obviously, is his breakup from Nancy, from what we read, because before then, there's no such suicide. After then, there was such suicide. So what mental health concerns he might have had at that age, whether he couldn't deal with the idea of being alone. I don't know the terminology for that mental health, but it is shown in that story. Later on, Jeremy meets Michelle at Timberlawn. And although, from what I say, this was a short relationship, he did write to her and they had conversations about family and future. Again, putting to that not wanting to be alone is what I take from that. This was a short relationship, as Michelle was readmitted to Timberlawn, but Jeremy was released. And around this time is when Jeremy and Michelle break up. And in late October 1990, Jeremy began attending Richardson High School, and the records of truancy and alleged threats against teachers started to make appearance in that time at that school. Jeremy's locker had also been searched numerous times during his time at the school, on occasion showing that he'd kept several bottles of what is called in America whiteout, and books of the book was called Cults That Kill. Whiteout being used to gain a high when breathed, essentially, from what I read. Into 1991, he was reported to steal, taking money from schools and events, and talking to friends about the fascination with suicide, and obviously furthering to taking more and more drugs of different types. On January 7th, Jeremy calls Nancy and tells her that this is the last time that they would talk, and the fact that him and his dad were going to go to Tokyo, Japan the next day. He said that he'd bought her a ring that he would send her, and that he wanted her to wear the ring and remember him while he was in Japan. And he promised to write her. And he wanted her to wear the ring as a sign of friendship, or even a promise to be an engagement ring. And they had apparently talked for an hour. This wasn't the last time that he spoke to Nancy, because the next day Jeremy called Nancy again in the morning, and they spoke for about 20 minutes, and he told her that he and his dad were leaving for Japan at 3 p.m. on that day, and he was en route to go pick up his passport. Nancy recalled that Jeremy was in good spirits and that he did not talk of suicide. He met his friends in school. They also spoke about the fact that he seemed happy, and which wasn't normal. The hugs, and they reported of hugging him and him being generally in a pleasant and upbeat mood. He gave a letter and a ring to his friends and stated that could they mail that for him, because he was, and quote, not going to be around after school. Following that, according to an article in the Dallas Morning News, because he had missed, several classes, when he went to the class that morning, after giving the ring, after giving the letter and saying that he wouldn't be around after school, he entered the classroom, and the teacher in his second period had told Jeremy to go get an admittance slip from the school office. Jeremy then put down his bag, left the classroom, went to his locker, but instead of returning with the admittance slip, he returned with a gun. Entered the classroom, and it is reported that he said to the classroom, "Miss, I got what I really went for." And at this moment is when it is reported that he committed suicide by shooting himself. And this being horrendous, horrific, for anybody who displayed that, for Jeremy's family, for everybody who had known him, and speaks of truly the silence in some of how lonely Jeremy felt, and the inability to be able to deal with all of these things that he'd gone through. And it's not without help. He'd attended, counselling. But focusing on the fact that the story was then read by Eddie Vedder, and a version of what was the true story about Jeremy was written, and so birthed the song Jeremy by Pearl Jam. So that song went on to be known by everyone, and I've spoken to a few people who didn't know that Jeremy was based on a true story. And although this is an incredibly saddening story, I think it's a story that should be known about the song and spoken of. But that's not to take away whatever feeling you get from the song when you listen to it, because that's up to you and how you interpret the song. Now, if you enjoy this content, be sure to leave some comments, hit the like button, and be sure to subscribe. I will still be doing all my other content as well. Whatever it is that you're doing, see you later.